Before we get into this interview, I did want to explain that Ido's answers are pre-recorded. So we had some communication via email, and I gave him the questions that I would like to ask in advance so that he would have time to be able to put that into his iPad. So that way the conversation would flow more easily and there wouldn't be gaps for viewers. I do want to state that this isn't an easy process to communicate. It's not a very quick thing. It does take a lot of time and effort. And this is something you may have noticed also with the interview with Ben. So I just want to reiterate that this isn't something that's very easy. It takes a lot of effort to communicate. And I just want to also express my appreciation for everyone who has communicated with me who are non-speakers or who have alternate ways of communicating, because this is very difficult and it does take a lot of labor. And it's amazing to me that people would take that much time and effort to converse with me and interview. So thank you so much to Ido. And I just wanted to explain that to you all before we get this started. Hi, Ido. Thank you for agreeing to interview with me today.
Hi, Stephanie. It is a pleasure to talk with you today.
So let's go ahead and get right into it. What was your life like before communication was unlocked for you?
Before communication was unlocked, no one knew I had an intact mind. The theories of behavioral therapy and all the rest insisted I didn't understand words. Of course, being locked in my own body, I had no means to dispute them. I had lots of therapy. My life was dominated by it. Touch your nose and flesh part drills bored me to tears as they drilled me endlessly in things I knew already but could not show. In school, we did the same remedial weather drills, math problems, and ABC lessons year after year. Like Anthony, the protagonist of my novel, In Two Worlds, I also lived in two worlds. My inner head was smart. The outside professionals perceived me as low functioning. My inner head multiplied, divided, and enjoyed math. The outside experts thought I didn't know what a number was. My inner head heard everything wrong my experts said about me, and the outside boy could not do a thing about it. In sum, before communication, life was powerless, boring, misunderstood, and lonely. Having communication is better.
When you were small, did you ever think you would be able to express yourself as you do now?
I was not sure my parents would crack the code of silence and figure out I was intellectually intact when I was a boy. But it did happen when I was 7, when my mom finally realized what she saw with her own eyes instead of listening to the platitudes of the so-called experts. It was just the beginning of the journey, because initially my skills were poor and needed to become more independent, which they did over time. I had the good fortune to work with an innovator, the inventor of RPM, who taught me to control my hand-to-touch letters to spell out my thoughts. This opened my world.
Do you feel understood and represented by speaking, lower support needs autism advocates that tend to dominate autism spaces, and why or why not?
That's a really important issue. The reason they dominate is because they talk. That's it in a nutshell. Not many non-speaking autistic people have been given a means to communicate by typing. To do so is a long journey requiring highly trained instructors. Unfortunately, the majority of non-speaking autistics have no means to say what they think because they have not received this kind of instruction. The result is that too many are totally trapped internally, and so they cannot speak for themselves. But that does not mean they don't have valuable perspectives. Often those with a diagnosis of autism who do speak verbally are put in the position of being spokespeople for all autistics by default, and because all have received the same diagnosis of autism. I have written several times that I consider this problematic. Autism spectrum disorder is pretty broad. Many people with little in common in terms of their challenges are lumped together under this broad umbrella term. I believe that how we are dealing with is less a spectrum and more like different neurological conditions that have some similar characteristics and many different ones that have been given the same name. Because they are lumped together as a spectrum, People assume that non-speaking autism is just a really severe version of Asperger's, or what used to be called Asperger's, or so-called mild or high-functioning autism. I don't see it that way, and it generates great confusion. For example, many so-called high-functioning autistics describe painful social difficulties due to challenges reading people and picking up on social nuance. They also speak clearly, do not require one-on-one support to perform tasks, and often are not diagnosed until adulthood. I am the opposite. I have great insight into people, high sensitivity to mood and nuance, can't speak to save my life, and need one-on-one help to perform numerous tasks and to help me stay regulated. I was diagnosed when I was a toddler. My disability is primarily motor. It is a disconnect between my intact thoughts and my motor system. It seems reasonable that different core symptoms should be recognized as different conditions, not as a spectrum. One condition may primarily be a neurological difficulty reading people, while the other may primarily be a mind-motor disconnect, despite both having problems of self-regulation and sensory challenges. Perhaps if we called what I have a different name, like global motor apraxia, it might clear up the confusion. Would it make sense to call heart conditions, asthma and being out of shape all related as part of a breathing spectrum disorder because they all lead to shortness of breath? Not possible because doctors identify heart, lung and fitness issues medically. Brain issues are the most unknown, so doctors look only to the external behavior. That's observational, not medical. As I have mentioned, I have had very unique experiences growing up non-speaking, not able to communicate at all until I was 7 years old, though I understood everything. I had unique experiences in having more than 40 hours per week of behavioral therapies from my earliest memories, being underestimated and incorrectly thought by experts to not to understand language, then breaking free, painstakingly learning to communicate by touch and letters with one finger, first on a letterboard, then a keyboard and tablet, and finally being mainstreamed in school, constantly fighting for my right to an education, the first non-speaking autistic in my school district to do so. It is my belief that non or limited speaking autistics who have broken through the communication barrier must be our own spokespeople, sharing our insights and recommendations based on our experiences and unique perspectives. Do you agree that the terms high and low functioning are problematic?
Yeah, I would say that they are. I think that what you brought up was very, very insightful. I think that it would definitely be more useful to be able to describe different parts of autism, whether that's as subsets or different conditions that have overlap, rather than by functioning. Because as you were saying, people were, confusing what you were able to do with what they could see on the outside, basically. And so you would be described most likely as low functioning. And that brings along assumptions about your mental capacity. It brings along assumptions about what you can achieve in life. And I don't think that that is accurate, obviously. So, yeah, I would agree with that. And thank you so much for that insight regarding the differences that are being perceived there. And I agree with you that people who are non-speaking and who have similar experiences to you definitely should be able to be their own spokespeople, because I think that the main narrative that I'm hearing from most speaking autistic people, maybe later diagnosed autistic people, kind of runs over maybe some of the things that you were saying. So I really appreciate that. What are your 3 most important tips for young people with autism today?
I would like to dedicate this answer to the non-speakers and their families who may be listening. Tip 1. Despite autism being hard and overwhelming at times, skills can improve with practice and determination. This may take longer than you find you can wait, but losing patience with your body doesn't hurry the process. Believe in yourself and practice, practice, practice. Tip 2. If you are on the journey to communication or communicating already, Then let the world hear what you think and have to say. They may not agree with every thought you have, but isn't that what having your own voice means? Parents whose children are not yet communicating, what do you have to lose by looking into touching letters to communicate for your child? I believe communication is a basic human right. Tip 3, make peace with your diagnosis. Many people don't like having autism. I don't like having autism. But not liking autism doesn't change the reality that I have it. I cannot undo my disability, but I can accept it as part of myself. I can work on my skills, and I can advocate to make the world a better place for my fellow autistics. My tip then is to not fight windmills, but to work with the reality of your life.
Fantastic tips. Why did you decide to write your novel in 2 worlds, and how did you come up with the idea for your character, Anthony?
I have a nonfiction book, Ido in Autismland, that I wrote when I was a teenager. It has had a significant impact on the lives of autistic non-speakers and their families. I have continued to write nonfiction in my blog, idoinautismland.com, basically continuing where my memoir left off. I have made inroads reaching out to families and professionals in the autism community through my nonfiction writing, but I realized the general public knew very little about non-speaking autism. In addition, I craved a challenge and a new creative experience. Writing a fictional story about a non-speaking autistic boy gave me the opportunity to do so much more than nonfiction allows. Instead of me describing and explaining what autism is like, fiction lets the readers experience autism for themselves. They go into the protagonist, Anthony's head, to swirl with him and his hyper-aroused senses, to hear his thoughts and face his outer challenges. Fiction let me create a true-to-life family and show how autism impacts them, for good and bad. It also gave me the chance to lay out current controversies through a variety of characters that have a huge impact on Anthony's life. In essence, fiction takes the reader on a journey into Autismland and exposes the reader to a new world that I hope will prompt social change and greater understanding and tolerance of non-speakers. Anthony is based on many of my own experiences and many observed incidents. In my case, as a boy who couldn't communicate until I was 7, observation was incredibly important in my life. I noticed everything. Then, because I could not speak or share my ideas using other methods, I thought constantly about what I saw. My own life is different than Anthony's in key aspects. I have a different and more perceptive family. I learned to communicate at 7, not 16, as he did, but I observed many of my autistic peers waiting to learn to communicate until they were 16 or older. Some are waiting indefinitely. To me, Anthony represents a kind of autistic everyman, and his journey moves the reader from hopelessness to hope. By the way, my books are available on Amazon, Kindle, and Smashwords as an ebook.
That's really awesome, the concept of fiction being a way for people to actually kind of experience it themselves and kind of get into that headspace. That's awesome. How was the book's title chosen, and what does it signify for you?
The title, In Two Worlds, reflects the multiple dualities of Anthony's life. He is torn between his inside and outside. In other words, his inner autism and his outer therapies, his smart brain and his outer presentation of ineptitude and confusion, his at times hallucinatory sensory system, and his outer life of mundane drills and behavior modification, his rich intelligent inner world and how he is erroneously perceived as low-functioning cognitively by experts, his life in silence without a means to communicate for 16 years with his entire destiny controlled by others, and his ultimate liberation to communication and some measure of autonomy. Anthony's two worlds reflect a boy living in a trapped body, while his mind and soul can soar freely.
You've also written a memoir. How did the experience of writing fiction and nonfiction compare for you?
Writing fiction is a lot more fun, to be honest. I have been writing nonfiction since I was 12, educating and advocating, and getting asked the same questions over and over. There are many misconceptions about autism that have truly harmed people, and I have felt a need to help fix things to the best of my ability. My memoir, Ido in Autismland, was written between the ages of 12 and 15. I felt passionate about writing it and poured my soul into it. 9 years later, I still get asked the same questions, and I assume I will forever. That's fine, by the way, but I needed to stretch myself in a new way. Inventing characters, villains and heroes, and the world of a family was incredibly enjoyable. I knew their world. I heard their conversations in my mind. The characters were vivid to me and became real to me, and they became real to readers too. It is worth mentioning that one widely believed theory about my disability is that we lack creativity, imagination, insight, and empathy. I hope my book turns that nonsense on its head.
That's fantastic. What do you hope readers take away from Into Worlds?
My hope is that by going into the head and heart of Anthony, that readers will be moved and gain insight into the experience of what it is like to live bombarded by sensory stimulation, but to be unable to communicate your thoughts and show people who you really are due to an unreliable motor system. The reader is the only one, besides Anthony, who knows he is smart and understands everything he hears. Consequently, they share his experiences and frustrations of living in a world that endlessly patronizes, underestimates, and misinterprets him. The reader experiences Anthony's highly sensory, at times almost psychedelic, inner world with him. His eventual liberation to communication follows what I would call a truly heroic struggle to be heard despite powerful forces that on the surface seem benevolent, but which actually keep him stuck in isolation. The reader is with Anthony as he finally breaks free from them. Into Worlds examines the toll non-speaking autism takes on family life, and it looks at the popular autism treatments and theories that dominate his every moment. Ultimately, Into Worlds tells the story of autism from the inside out.
And how would you describe non-speaking autism to others?
It is important to understand that many people believe non-speaking autism is a language processing and cognitive disability, when for me, and for thousands of others, it is actually primarily a motor disability. Severe autism itself is a huge challenge and very frustrating. It prevents people from moving and behaving as they like and means they must always have some kind of supervision in life. But the misunderstanding of the disability just makes the situation exponentially worse. After all, if you had a disability that trapped you in dumb-looking motor patterns, you might be annoyed at the trap, but then trapped further by the professional response that believed that the motor patterns reflected lack of intelligence or thought. Try to imagine being paralyzed. You tell your body to move and it refuses. Your brain is okay, it's the disconnect that causes the problem. Now imagine that your body is moving, but doesn't obey your brain. That creates impulses, patterns, and erratic movements. That's autism. Kind of a moving paralysis, not a lack of thinking or understanding. Simply put, not talking is not the same as not thinking.
Thank you so much for your insight. I really appreciate you taking the time to interview with me today and share your insight with everyone. I believe that people listening to even just this conversation will definitely kind of have their eyes open to more. And I really hope that they go ahead and check out your memoir and your fiction novel, because I think both will give them even more insight. And yeah, thank you so much for being on here today.
It was my pleasure.